Okay, let's kick off. Hi, everybody. This is Charles Roberts. I'm the president of Your Castle Real Estate and Sherwood Real Estate. And like many of you, I'm an investor. And like others of you, I am a real estate agent and looking at how to evaluate properties. So what we're going to do over the next 45 minutes or so is look at how we tend to evaluate properties. And I'm going to tell you, it's about 60% science and 40% art, or maybe 70-30 or 50-50 or something like that. It's not all about spreadsheets, and in my opinion, it's really not all about what your gut tells you. It's a combination of the two. At least that's the way I look at it. I've been investing for 20 years. I've made every mistake in the book. There just isn't a mistake you could possibly have made that I haven't made. So I'm going to go through a bunch of the things that I've done right and wrong over time, and hopefully you learn from it. And one of the things that we're going to bring to you today is looking at a property. This is actually a property that I looked at just a couple days ago on East Ford Place, and I'm going to show you exactly what I did to evaluate the property on a spreadsheet. That would be the 60% kind of science part. So that's what we're going to do. If you have any questions, type into the question box. Always love to veer and to zig and to zag and to understand that this is not a perfect science. You know, this isn't chemistry. This is sort of chemistry and like art history or something like that, where you have to look at different things to figure out what's right for you and what's right for your clients. So let me begin by simply going to the spreadsheet. I'm sorry, going to the MLS sheet. This is a property that I looked at 3 days ago on East Ford Place in Sable Cove. And to most of you, this should look pretty familiar because this is the RE Colorado spreadsheet. So I have a client who's actually one of my agents. She's a very experienced, she's a builder. She does a lot of stuff. She's building Lon Welsh's $2.7 million house. She does just lots of great stuff. And she wants to buy some rental property, but is sort of stuck. Like she and her husband are having a hard time making decisions. So she said, Charles, can you help us do this? And I said, great, love to work with you. You know, and let's go out and look at some properties. So let's start with this property right here, and I'll tell you what we found attractive about it before we went out and looked. This is a really small 482 square foot, one bedroom in Sable Cove. And I've actually bought properties there in the past, so I know Sable Cove, you know, fairly well. Decent HOA. It's actually a nice looking physical outside. You know, it's a pretty good place. And look at that price, $104.9. Well, yeah, let's go take a look at that. So we look here, and by the way, you'll see that it says under contract, and no, we didn't get it under contract. It went to someone else. But when we were looking at it, of course, it was still available. So some of the highlights from here that we will put into the spreadsheet well, you see it's a one bedroom, one bath, so it gives us an idea of what the rent would be. And then going down a little further, beautifully updated unit, move-in ready, light and bright, completely remodeled. So we said, yeah, we looked at this for 10 seconds and said, sure, let's go take a look at this and see what we think. Let's see if it makes some sense. So that's what we did. So now let me jump to the spreadsheet. And this is the spreadsheet that our colleague Joe Massey put together. If you haven't seen it before, let me give you a quick introduction. So when I teach a class, there's of course always a continuum of people. They're like the propeller heads on the right who know everything about coding spreadsheets, and you're wonderful. And then there are the people on the left who go, oh my God, a spreadsheet, what is that? I don't know what that is. I'm very intimidated by it. What I really like about this spreadsheet is that it kind of works for both groups of people. It is a super simple way to input data on a property that you might want to buy as a long-term buy and hold, long-term rental. And it can give you some very detailed information. But I like it even more because it doesn't just jump to the detailed information, it gives you information in a continuum. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we fill out the spreadsheet, and then I'm going to start by just showing you a couple of the numbers that we look at in the spreadsheet to understand whether we want to go and look at this property. And it can be done very quickly. So that's what I'm going to do here. And if you have any questions, just click on the questions and let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow, or if I miss something, absolutely point it out. But for the time being, I'm just going to go in and show you literally what I did. When I looked at the property, I said, great, take 30 seconds and type it in. So this is all you do. You type in where the boxes are yellow. And to me, that's like one of the best features of this, because when I'm standing in front of people or a client, I want to be embarrassed and like go, oh, how come I can't type something in here? Oh, that's because it's a calculation. No, no, no. Let's make it super simple. Let's actually color code where you type stuff in. So look at that. That's where you type in the address. Easy enough. Number of units. So Joe is a conventional lender. He works for Castle & Cook. He's an extremely productive loan officer, and he built this little spreadsheet. Now, he just does 1 to 4 units. So in this case, if this was a duplex, boom, I would just change it to a duplex right here, 2 units, and then he'd remind you that you probably have to put 25% down. But in this case, this is just a tiny little single-family condo. Here's the down payment percentage, and these clients were going to put probably 20% down. That's typical 20-25% for a single unit, but they could do something else. So let's say they wanted to do 15%. Yep, that would have worked. And by the way, isn't this nice? You click this little red button right here, this little red arrow right there, and he says, 20% minimum for single family residence, 25 for a duplex and a fourplex. In this case, let's go 20%. Then we have the purchase price, 1049, and then we have acquisition costs. And once again, let's say you're an agent who has no memory like me. Well, you don't want to be memorizing what the heck acquisition costs are. How about you just click right here and say, that might be property insurance, inspection costs, appraisal, transfer taxes, stuff like that. On a typical property, we're looking at $1,500, $2,000, sometimes $2,500, just depending. This is a relatively simple single unit, so I put $1,500. Leave it at $1,500 to $2,000. Don't overthink it. This is just a quick first look at a property. Then we get here, and you'll see that you can't see. I'm desperately clicking. I can't click on these 3 right here because they're not yellow. These are the loan costs, the down payment, and the mortgage balance. So the loan cost is hardwired. I don't know, I think Joe's like 1.25 points or whatever the math would turn out to be. And that is standard for all of his products. So that's the loan cost. Then the down payment, of course, would just be the math of 20%. And then the mortgage balance. All of that is done for you automatically. And I got a question here. Hey, Dave. Dave, I think you're actually in the next room. I just heard you. What are examples of items that are part of the acquisition cost? So fortunately, I should have actually checked that before because we talked about that, and I think you probably asked that great question before I told you. So holding that right there, it would be the property insurance, the 1-year prepaids, inspection costs, appraisal costs, transfer taxes, title insurance, recording fees, closing fees. Those are what we typically put in here. And once again, I don't spend an enormous amount of time wondering, is it $1,500 or $1,512? Because I couldn't care less. I'm looking at a quick pass when I'm first looking at potentially going out and viewing a property. So I would say in general, if you use this spreadsheet, put in something like $1,500 to $2,000. Something like that will get you really close to where you want to be. So great question. Thanks for that. Keep asking them if you have more questions. So now we have initial repair costs, and that's something that is important to know. So let's say, for example, I could buy this property for $1,049, and it was in perfect shape. As it turns out, this one is. Well, that's very different than saying I could buy it for $1,049, but I have to put $10,000 into it. From my perspective, when I want to look at things like cap rates, I actually want to build in, because that's the way I look at it, the initial repair cost. So if I put in here, say $10,000, that would mean that essentially it's effectively I'm paying $105, $114.9 for it. So all you want to do is do a quick estimate of what you want to, what the initial repair cost would be. And I've got notes here from Channing, who's helping me out here. And so I'm saying, if people ask about recording, tell them to keep registration links. Actually, Channing, why don't you just, Channing's going to actually tell you something.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to access the recording of this webinar after we're done, if you just hold on to the same link that you used to register for the webinar, that will take you into the recording. I'll post it in the comments section too.
So isn't that fantastic? So not only do you have to try to keep up with me and answer questions here, but you know what? If you just didn't understand it, if I wasn't clear, if my Boston accent came out and I've been talking too fast or something like that, you can go back and just see the recording. So again, initial repair cost is, of course, what it would take to get it. In this case, since we're talking long-term buy and hold, what it would take to get it rentable. And then you would have your total initial investment. Good so far. Then we have the mortgage interest rate. And right now, I threw out something like 4 3/4. Obviously, depending upon what you're doing, that might change depending upon the terms, the type of property, the loan product, how qualified the buyer is. But at this point, I put in something like 4 3/4 to get started. And I just did a really simple 30-year term. And we'll come back to this later, but this is extra principal per month. At this point, like I said, I just want a black and white quick analysis. I'll put 0 here. Now we will jump down to the monthly rent. We actually came in at $975 was our best guess. I remember I put in $950 before I looked at it, and then we went and looked at it, looked a little closer at Zillow and Craigslist, and it was in really nice shape. It was a top floor unit, so we gave it a bump of just a few dollars. So we took it to $975, and it's not a fourplex, so we don't have to fill these out. And again, if this seems easy, it really is. I mean, once you do it a few times, it'll take you 60 seconds to fill this out. That's what's so wonderful about this is you just fill in some data. So for vacancy factor, I think I wanted to put in 5%. Right now, vacancy rates for 1 to 4 units is like 3.4%, but 5%, that'll cover it. Annual rent increase, let's put 4%. That's the 40-year. 4 to 5% is what we've seen over the long term. Annual appreciation, I'll put in 6%. Whatever works for you. I think these are reasonable numbers. I would stand by these numbers, but if you want to have a higher vacancy factor or lower annual rent increase, whatever you think, whether you're the investor or the agent investor, you put in what makes sense for you. And we're getting close to the end because it really is that simple. So real estate taxes. So you can see right here, real estate taxes were $329. Type in 329. Property insurance, put in $250. I own a bunch of these. I pay between like $230 and maybe $290 for all of my condos and townhomes. So I put in about $250. They are going to manage it themselves. So we have 0 for property management. You might put in something like 7, 8, 9% for property management, and you'll see that these are actually yearly because right here, because Joe put in annual. Good, annual operating expenses. But we have nothing for property management. And this one right here is the one that people always ask about, and you're absolutely right to ask. What sort of amount should you put away for reserves? Like, things are going to happen. You know that you're going to have to paint a wall and maybe put back a window that your tenant took or something like that. How much do you put away? And it's a great question. And I'll tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been managing my properties ever since. I have over 2,500 tenant months of management. And I'm just sitting here shaking my head going, yeah, I don't know any better now than I knew 20 years ago. We put in something like maybe 10% of gross rents for property management, and then 5% for repairs and maintenance. Something like that would maybe make sense. And if you've been doing this for a number of years, my guess is you probably actually don't have a number. It tends to be people who've never bought property before who say, what number should I use? And it tends to be the experienced people who say, yeah, just have enough money in your bank account to deal with it. But short of saying nothing, maybe 5, 6% of gross you want to put away. Clarissa has a question. How do you find vacancy rate? So let's go back to that. Great question. So it's not so much finding it as, say, predicting it. So right now, in the Apartment Association of Metro Denver's quarterly reports, they are the big daddy. They do these tremendously detailed reports on our rental market. They do it both for 5+ unit properties as well as 1 to 4 units. That's where I find it. That's what I use for the data. And right now, like I said, I think it's like 3.2 or 3.4% for 1 to 4 units. So I put in, say, 5. If you're a little more, you want to be a little more conservative, I don't know, put 6 or 7. I mean, I don't think that's accurate, but put it in. If you want to be a little less conservative, if you have years of doing this and you feel that you keep your places rented more often, a bit lower. But that's really where we find it. The Apartment Association of Metro Denver records it, sends it out quarterly, and then that's what we're tracking right here. Great question. Dave, got another question. Well, it starts by saying no need to mention this in the webinar. So of course now I have to actually say it. Who's your insurance contact? My guy charged me $400 for my most recent condo purchase. Yeah, so I've been working with Cindy Adams at Adams Insurance Solutions or something for 20 years. 303-980-0303. That was off the top of my head. That's how long I've known her. So she's great. She's a broker. We tend to work, I think I have all of my stuff with Safeco. We actually, maybe 4 or 5 weekends ago, I spent 4 hours in her office and really updated everything. And I have auto insurance, auto insurers, which is not just auto, that's the name of the company in Safeco. But you know, she's real good, and feel free to call her and tell her that you know me, and she's more than happy to work with you. Cindy Adams, 303-980-0303. Say hi for me. And then Clarissa, how about Northern Colorado? How about it? So in terms of the vacancy factor, I actually don't know. I'm sitting here scratching my head. If you send me an email, Clarissa, I'll ask my buddy James Orr, who is the oracle of Northern Colorado rental property. He's an independent agent and an investor, and about the smartest guy I know anyway, as well as he's about the smartest guy I know in investment real estate, and he lives in Fort Collins. I'm guessing it's very close. And so if we're, 3.5% in Denver, I'm going to guess it's like 3.7 or 3.3. It's such a close number that it's not actually worth spending a lot of time trying to find the difference. But to answer your question, let me know. Send me an email, and I'll ask James, and he can tell you exactly what the number is. Great questions. Great. Keep it up. Sorry. Oh, one more.
Clarissa.
Yeah, no, that was the Northern Colorado.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, we got that one too. Okay, so coming back to repairs and maintenance, that's the one that we always talk a little bit more about. What's going to happen is, you're not going to have any problems for 3 years, and then your furnace is going to go out, and you're going to have to spend $1,800 on a furnace, and there it is, like $600 a year. More than anything, look at the forest for the trees. Like, don't figure out if it should be 6.1% or 5.9%, because that is an utter waste of time. What you want to do is make sure you have enough money. So when you have a bad day or a bad week, you don't lose a property. You don't say real estate sucks. You own these properties forever. I can just guarantee you, you buy a property, you own it forever. You buy a couple, you own them forever. You will be very, very, very happy you did that. So if you want to put 10% or 12%, whatever it takes to let you sleep at night, to let you own property and make sure you're never there near the edge, that's my best advice, is just make sure that you have what it takes, both sort of spiritually, but in this case, economically, to just get through a bad situation. I would say somewhere in the 5, 6, 7% is probably what it's going to take. But who knows? Maybe you buy a property in the first month. Oh my God, all of a sudden, the sewer, you didn't realize the sewer broke. You just got to make sure that you can make it through. In this case, I'll put $600. Now here we have a whole bunch of other things we could put in: utilities, water, sewer, trash. And because this was a condo, we generally, it's all being paid through the HOA. But if it's a single family home, maybe you're paying for the water and sewer, maybe you're paying for electric. If it's a fourplex, there might be some common areas. So we built all of this in. And on top of that, in case we forgot anything, boom, Joe put in other, type in other and put a number here. In this case, it's real simple because we just have the HOA dues, and you will see that the HOA dues are $200 a month, which is another reason that we kind of liked it. It's got a clubhouse, community pool, and it's only $200 a month. And of course, it's only a 1-bedroom, so it's not phenomenally wonderful, but it's pretty good. And that's what we put right here. Got a question. Does $5K per property set aside work? Or would you keep saving the 10% a year no matter how much money you have available in your operating account? So the answer is I can't really answer that. Partly because if you own $1 billion, 80 billion unit complex, obviously 5K, well, you say 5K per property, so probably you mean 5K per unit. I'm not even sure what you mean. I would say that we like to think of it in terms of percentage, because you might be a tiny little 1-bedroom condo, or you might be a 4-plex or even an 8-plex. So it depends on the size of the property and the number of units. For this property, let's just say we're talking about this one. Honestly, I think 5,000 is more than enough. You know, a furnace will be, my guy would do it for 1800. I think it has AC, so, you know, to fix an AC is whatever. There's not much. So I would say, to answer your question here, is that 5,000 is definitely enough. If you didn't have 5,000, then maybe you put, you know, 5, 6, 7% away. Just make sure you have enough for a rainy day. So I've got a question from my friend Brian. Brian says, what do you do if all the numbers work out great, but the building itself is not in great condition in a sketchy area? Do you still move ahead? Well, that's a great question. And I think I started with like 60% science and 40% art. And that is part of the art, because when you buy a property, you're going to do as much due diligence as you can. You're going to look at you know, the economics. You're going to look at the quarterly meeting minutes. You're going to run through the P&L and the financial statement. And if you're really good at this, maybe you get something out of it and maybe you don't. So the question is, would you buy a property in what you would call a rundown complex? Well, I will tell you that I bought one 3 weeks ago, and it's in a C+ complex. It was just laid in my lap by a colleague of mine who just said, hey, if you want it for this price, take it. And it was such a great price. I told him he was crazy. He said, nah, I don't want it anymore. If you want it, it's yours. So I bought it, and it's in a C+ community. It's an A property. He did a beautiful fix-up. So a lot of it has to do with how you feel about it. The issue is that you are oftentimes not going to have enough data to be able to make an economic decision. It's going to be well, I'm a risk taker enough to say, yeah, it looks like it needs some work, but I don't see anything in the minutes that say they have a $3,000 special assessment coming down the pike. And what you'll want to do is to come up with a scientific answer. And guess what? You should be doing something else for a living, because so much of this, you can't come up with a scientific decision. To the extent that you have extra money for a rainy day, you're willing to take a risk, you will always get a higher cap rate, meaning more cash flow, in a property that looks beat up. Simply because guys like you, Brian, will spend more money for a nice looking property, meaning you're going to get less monthly return for the rent you get. On the other hand, let's say you're younger. Let's say you want to take some risk. Let's say you have enough money for the rainy day. You might say, I want to actually take a little more risk and get more cash flow. And that's the art part of it. All I can say is that I generally counsel people not to be a hero, not to take huge risks, because that's how I see people fail in real estate. So I just happen to be a really, really conservative investor. I wasn't when I started 20 years ago, and let me tell you the problems I put myself into. So that's where you as an investor, or you as an agent, or you as a client, need to kind of figure out how you want to do this. So it's not a perfect answer, but it's about the best answer I can say. It totally depends on you. I love the question. Thank you. Kim's got a question similar to the current question. How do you think about the healthiness of the HOA? If the HOA lacks sufficient reserves, deferred maintenance, i.e. the roof, how do you approach that? You're right. It is very similar. And I will tell you, I'm not an MBA. I have a CCIM, so I can do some financial stuff. But I've spoken to my colleague, Brent Goyer, who's a Your Castle agent and knows more about HOAs than anyone I know. And I've asked him this question. And he spent about 45 minutes speaking in a language that I'm not quite familiar with. All I can tell you is I didn't really learn much, because it's really complicated. And so much of what he said is, well, if this, and then, well, you want to look at that, and there's a little bit of a gray area here. And I'll tell you, a lot of people don't buy in HOAs because they are fearful of an HOA, and I understand that. All I can say is that they're looking at the financials. Talking to your lender would be a good way to start. Literally, I gave these financials to Joe Massey. I paid cash for this, but I still gave them to Joe and said, Joe, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, it's got some problems, but you'll probably be okay. And that's about what I did. So there is learning to be done to understand the health of an HOA. But I'll tell you, it can be black and white, but there's a whole bunch of gray in the middle. Like, everything can look good, and there might be somebody stealing money. Or everything can look bad, and it's just because they're not really good at putting their numbers together. So that it's an issue. And I'm not sure if you're an agent or you're an investor, but I never bought in an HOA until 2 years ago for myself. And until 3 or 4 years ago, most of what we were buying were single families because we were a little bit afraid of HOAs. So I'm not giving you a great answer. I would say the one thing I would do is talk to my lender. So the lenders tend to know more, and the underwriters certainly know more, but you generally can't talk to them. You're looking for red flags, maybe, like in the minutes in the last quarterly meeting, did someone mention the $50 million roof that needs to be repaired next month? Things like that. Are they putting money into reserves? There are some red flags, but I'll tell you, there's enormous shades of gray, and I'm no particular expert, but maybe your lender would know better. And got a follow-up from Brian. Also, property managers can be a good resource for HOA history. Totally agree. So I'll oftentimes call my property managers and they'll say, Charles, stay away from East Harvard. Man, those units, the HOA pays for the heat, and they ran out of heat a few years ago. Google search it, talk to your property managers. Yep, that's a really good one. And you can see all of these shades of gray. So often we want to make a science out of something that's an art, and that can be very, very frustrating, which I'm telling you, it's close to 50-50. It's kind of science and kind of art. Great questions, really, really good discussions. And I am now at the end of the input section. This is all I do. I mean, think about it. How long would it take you after you've done 3 or 4? If you have the MLS sheets, you have the data right here, and you've done a couple of these, how long would it take you to fill this out? 20 seconds, 30 seconds? I do it every single time. Why do I do it? Let me click on cash flow, and I'll tell you why. So we'll start up here, and this is the second tab. Inputs is where we just typed in everything. Now we click on cash flow, and it gives us, in a nice orderly fashion, everything we just put in. Purchase price, the mortgage, total cash investment. That's really good. Total cash investment, you know, how much you're going to need to bring to the table. Annual vacancy rate. And now we start to get some of the pertinent data. Expected annual rental income. And then here are all your expenses. So you have income minus expenses, which would be called the net operating income, which is this number right here, your net operating income. And then this is your mortgage. And here you have your annual cash flow before taxes. Very pertinent number. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of metrics that I think are very useful. And again, I don't know who you are, but if I can guess of all the people we have on this webinar and listening, there's a continuum. Far left is never seen a spreadsheet in my life. Far right is you're a Harvard MBA and like too smart for me, okay? You decide how you want to use this. I'm going to give you my advice. I'm a big cap rate guy. Anybody who's come to my classes knows that I like cap rate. Cap rate is the net operating income right there minus the expenses right there. And by the way, in case you forget, it's right there. I'm sorry, divided. I said minus, I meant divided. It's the net operating, the net operating income. And so that gives you the cap rate. No, I'm sorry, I'm completely messing up. I apologize for that. It's the net operating income divided by the purchase price. I don't even know what I was thinking, but of course I should just be reading this. The net operating income, which is the 7536 divided by the purchase price, that gives you cap rate. So what does a 7.2 mean? So let's say you've never seen investment property. 7.2 doesn't mean anything. So you're not lost yet because I haven't taught you anything. 7.2 doesn't mean anything. All I can tell you is that 7.2 is bigger than 7 and lower than 7.5. The higher the number, the more money you're getting, other things being equal. So ideally, you want a higher cap rate. The problem is, in the real world, a higher cap rate tends to mean the property is a lower neighborhood in worse condition. The thing that absolutely holds true in our market is the lowest price property in the worst condition, the worst neighborhood, will get the highest cap rate. The reason I like cap rate is I spend a lot of my time out looking at properties. And when I see a 7.2 in this current Denver market, kind of interesting. Now, if it was a 5 cap, that would mean, of course, it's a lower income. I'm getting less money per month. That doesn't particularly interest me. If this was a 9.2, I'd be like, wow, what is going on with this property? I got to go look at it right away. The cap rate assumes that you have bought the property outright. And of course, most of you aren't going to pay cash for a property. But the genius of the cap rate is it doesn't bring into bear the loan and the loan variable. It just compares property to property to property. So overall, if I had a 7, a 7.2, and a 7.4, everything else being equal, the 7.4 would be the better cash flow property. So that's the one I'd want to look at first. So I like cap rate, but let's look at other numbers here. You have the cash on cash return, which is your annual pre-tax cash flow before taxes divided by how much you put down. And in that case, that's 9%. And I've got a lot of investors and a lot of really great colleagues who like cash on cash return as their metric. And what this means is basically if you put your money in US Bank, you'll get like 0.01% return on your money. In this case, you're going to get 9%. This is why you're on this webinar, because you can make a lot more money if you're willing to take the risk and do the work in real estate. So for this property, we've got a cash on cash of 9%, a cap rate of 7.2, and then we have another metric called a gross rent multiplier. And that is just a really high level view of the purchase price divided by the monthly rent, and a 107.6 in this market is pretty good. Typical of what we're buying is a 120. In this case, the lower number, the better. And let me hold off on 5-year after-tax return. Got a couple of questions, and I'll come back to this. Question from Brian, I think that's the next one. If you have a higher cap rate, and that means it's in a lower class neighborhood or a less desirable neighborhood. If you have a higher cap rate and that means it's in a lower class neighborhood or a less desirable building, doesn't that also mean you'll have more annual maintenance and therefore less cash? I don't know. So you could say that, and I would say, great, do this for 20 years and show me the data. You would think that's the case. I totally get it. And it's something you and I have talked about in class before, where should one perhaps buy a nicer property in a nicer neighborhood because you'll get better tenants? And all I can say is after 2,500 tenant months, I thought I knew everything on month 1, and now I don't know anything because the world is a complicated place and people are complicated. So yes, I can certainly make the case that you would think a nicer building would have that advantage. And I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying I can tell you that there are trade-offs. And what we tend to buy is stuff in the mid-7 caps, meaning we're not buying in the worst neighborhoods. We're buying 1 or 2 steps above it, but we're not buying in the best neighborhoods because those are 5 caps. I can also tell you that no matter what you buy and where you buy it, if you own it for 20 years, you're a millionaire. You just buy a few properties, own it forever, and no matter what, you're going to make tons of money. The details, however, are what you're comfortable with. Maybe you're just more comfortable in a 5 cap, and that is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. The mistake would be buying a 7 cap, not being happy with that property, and being a very, very unhappy landlord. So I would say that other things being equal, if you buy a less nice property, that you may have more expenses, but in the end, it's really, really hard to fathom. And like I said, I just bought a property in a C+ complex, Green Gable, 2575 South Sheridan. Check it out. It's not really nice. I'm making a mint off that thing. And I think I will make a mint. And because of who I am, because of my experience, I'm just happy with it. It works for me. That's the way I would put it. Great question.
David's got one.
David says, do you ever look at DCR or internal ROR? Okay, so he's asking about the DCR, which is the debt coverage ratio. So I can tell, David, you probably went to Lon's class because Lon is obsessed with debt coverage ratio. No, I don't. That doesn't mean I'm right or wrong, and it certainly doesn't mean Lon is right or wrong. It just means most of what I do is not commercial. So the debt coverage ratio is defined as the net operating income, net income, divided by the PI, the principal plus interest. And when you get a commercial loan, generally commercial banks, First Bank, Bank of the West, they want to see a DCR of 125 or more. In other words, they want to see the net operating income 25% above the payment because they want to know if things go bad, you can make your payment. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using DCR. I mean, truly, I really mean that. Just pick what you want. I like cap rate. If you like DCR, great. Lon likes DCR because he does a lot of commercial stuff. There's no but here. It's literally just get comfortable with the metric you like. So what this means is a high cap rate means a higher cash on cash return means a lower gross rent multiplier, and it means a lower debt coverage ratio. But you don't have to learn all of that stuff. Just get one. All you need is the one metric you like to be able to compare properties. But personally, I don't like DCR. I like cap rate because most of what I do is on the residential side. But great question. I love that. Brian asked a question. Good point. Oh, I guess it comes down to your comfort level. Yeah, comfort level is what it's all about. So as an agent, what's very important to me is when I meet a client, the client will be like a college-educated, really smart person. And they'll ask something like, you know, what property should I buy? And the answer is, I have no idea. And it comes down to exactly what Brian just said. It's about your comfort level. And then they'll get frustrated because they'll be like, well, shouldn't there, you know, look, I want a great deal. And I'll say, the problem is a great deal to you could be very different than a great deal to me. And this is why we become obsessed with real estate, because it's so interesting, because it isn't 100% science, 60% science at best. Brian just brought up the comfort level. That's the 40%. And what I can tell you is if you're not comfortable with property, you're going to hate real estate. You're going to get out and you're not going to die wealthy. You're not going to be happy. So you have to be comfortable, even if that means maybe you get a lower cap rate and a lower cash on cash return. Being comfortable with your property is so important. Glad you brought that up. So Dave, it's just a warm and fuzzy, but I guess cap rate can be the same. You know, cap rates can be anything. I'll tell you right now in this market as of February of 2018, cap rates suck. I mean, it's just so tight right now. If I looked at the 30 or so properties we closed last year, my typical cap rate was in the mid sevens. We had some eights and even a couple of low nines, and then we had a couple of really low sevens, but mid sevens was about where we are. Right now, I'm going out looking at 6.5s. It's very, very tight right now, okay? But it's important to understand the numbers so you decide, does it make sense to look at property? And then Kim has a follow-up question. For this particular example, how would you rate this location property, A, B, or C? Cap rate seems too good to be true in this market. Well, okay. How would I rate this complex? I would rate it about a B, and I'm sitting here shrugging my shoulders like it's clearly not an A, but it's not a C. You know, it's a pretty nice property. One of my investors bought one about 1.5 years ago. I called up Vital when I was there and said, hey, Vital, just, you know, what experience have you had? He said, no, had no trouble renting it. HOA has been pretty good. They're on top of things. So I'd give it like a solid B. And then Kim says, the cap rate seems too good to be true in this market. 7.2. Yeah, well, the truth is, I don't know what it went under contract for. So Kim Pitnello was the listing agent. She and I used to do tons of deals back when she was like the queen of Denver. She was a big, big, big REO agent back during the downturn. And but it's not polite to ask what it went for, but I think there's a really good chance it went above asking price. So let me actually just go back here and let's actually have some fun now, because we're having fun, remember? Okay, let's say the purchase price was $110,000. How does that affect the cap rate? It means it was a 6.9. I think it's entirely possible it actually went for more like 110, in which case it was a 6.9. So that's how I would answer it, is that it's very possible it didn't come out at a 7.2. And that's the fun of using this type of spreadsheet, is to be able to go in and make these changes. You know, maybe you got it real cheap. Maybe you got it for $99,000. Wow. What would that mean? It would mean that you got a 7.6 cap on it. And then maybe you want to go back here and say you paid 105 for it, but maybe, you know, it turns out you can get 1,000 in rent. How does that change everything? Gives you a 7.4 cap instead of a 7.2. So let me stop here and just see if anybody has any follow-up questions. This is a very introductory discussion. There's a lot more to this spreadsheet. You can click on these tabs and you can see it actually gets very, very interesting and a lot more complicated. But for this medium as a webinar, I want to stop right here and just start with this basic stuff and then come back a little bit later with some more stuff. Yeah, and then in terms of, got a question about the file. If you want this file, what's the best way? Should they email me or email Joe? Or I'm asking Channing.
Well, we could try and share it through the webinar platform. We haven't tried that before, so we'd be using you guys as guinea pigs, but we could try that real quick.
Okay, so we can try to share this through. If we decide not to, or if it doesn't get to you or whatever, you can always email me at croberts, the letter CROBERTS, at yourcastle.org. And again, this is Joe Massey's spreadsheet, so we thank him for this. So, you know, if you're doing a loan, maybe have him give you a quote on a loan, and hopefully this helps you out. So we're about 40 minutes into this, probably a pretty good time to start winding down. Went through a lot of information. If you have any additional questions, take the next few seconds, type something in, and let me know. But I think we've covered a lot here, putting in this information and having a basic understanding. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the 5-year after-tax return. So this is a slightly more complex like amalgamation of the data. And you don't have to understand it. All you need is DCR or cash on cash or cap rate. But a 5-year after tax basically says if you buy it, if you assume a tax rate, and then you sell it based upon the assumed appreciation, what would the expected increase on your dollar be per year? And in this case, amazingly, it's a 21% after tax return. And this is what I said, like, don't lose the forest for the trees. It's a 7.2, it's a 7.4. I mean, where else are you getting 20% after-tax returns? This is why people buy real estate. And the more you learn about real estate, the more you understand the numbers are very, very interesting. Now, don't get me started. I had a lot of tenants. It's tough. When it's tough, it's tough. When times are bad, they're tough. You make your money. But the after-tax return is yet another metric that you can use to better understand your returns. I do have one more question from Brian. Thank you. You've talked about buildings that are in A, B, C class buildings. Is that based mainly on the condition, or does it take into account the rentability of the unit? So I'm staring at the wall going, I don't know. It's kind of like the famous Supreme Court quote on pornography. It's really hard to define, but you know it when you see it. How about that? It's really hard to define, but you kind of know when you see it. I mean, that's, you know, hey, I'm sorry, I'm quoting the Supreme Court from the 70s, so leave me alone. It's like a really nice one is an A and a really bad one is a C and everything else is in the middle. And if you did a Google search, I frankly don't know what they would say, but it's going to be something like that because every city is going to be different. I mean, Oakland Bs might be different than San Francisco B properties. But it's essentially, it's kind of like black diamond blue. You know how, I don't know if you ski, Brian, but like green, blue, and black, there's no definition. It's actually up to the ski resort to pretty much break them up. It's the same sort of thing. You kind of know a B when you see it. I'd put this one as a B. What I mentioned that the one that I bought was I consider kind of a C+. I would say it's definitely 1 or 2 grades lower. That's the way I look at it. So great questions, great thoughts. Okay, with that, 45 minutes seems like a perfect time. Thank you all for joining us. Continue joining us. If you have anything, feel free to follow up. If we can help you with anything, continue coming to our webinars. And as Channing said, the same link will allow you to hear a recording of this. And if you need to touch base with me, my email again, croberts@yourcastle.org, or you can give me a call, 303-523-3837. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.